Go ahead, Aaliyah. Impress us. Daniel Whitmore said it with the relaxed smile of a teacher who expected the room to enjoy what came next. A few students laughed before Aaliyah Brooks even stood. Room 214 at Jefferson Ridge Middle School smelled faintly of dry erase marker and floor cleaner, the kind of sharp morning scent that clung to the tile long after the custodians had gone. Fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of desks. Outside the tall windows, pale Virginia sunlight stretched across the soccer field. Aaliyah sat in the third row near the glass, one hand resting on a worn spiral notebook. She was 14, black, quiet enough that some teachers mistook silence for uncertainty. Whitmore had just written a higher-grade math problem across the whiteboard, something far beyond the lesson they had been working on 10 minutes earlier. "Since Aaliyah seems interested in correcting me today," he said, stepping away from the board, "let us see how far ahead she really is." Another ripple of laughter moved through the room. Connor Blake, sitting 2 rows back, turned his phone face up beneath the edge of his desk and tapped the timer. 30 seconds, he whispered to the boy beside him. Aaliyah heard him. She did not turn around. Whitmore held out the black marker. "Well," Aaliyah stood slowly. Her sneakers made almost no sound against the tile. She took the marker, but instead of writing, she read the problem. Once, then again. Whitmore folded his arms. The equation looked complicated enough to make most 8th graders stop at the first line, but that was not what bothered Aaliyah. It was the missing condition. The problem had been written as if only one case existed, yet nothing on the board actually restricted it that way. She looked toward the teacher edition on Whitmore's desk, then back at the equation. Connor's timer continued counting. 12 seconds. 15. 18. Someone near the windows gave a quiet laugh. Whitmore tilted his head. "Take your time." The words sounded patient, but the room heard the joke underneath them. Aaliyah tightened her fingers around the marker. She had felt this before. Connor used an unfamiliar method, and Whitmore called it advanced thinking. Aaliyah did the same, and he asked who had shown her. Connor answered quickly and was confident. Aaliyah answered carefully, and somehow that became hesitation. She looked at the board again. The problem did not know any of that. Numbers did not care who stood in front of them. They only cared whether the logic held. Aaliyah stepped closer to the whiteboard. Instead of solving, she drew a small vertical line beside the equation. Whitmore frowned. "What are you doing?" She turned around. The laughter had faded now. Connor glanced at his timer. 27 seconds. Aaliyah looked directly at Whitmore. "Before I start, I need to know which version you want." He gave a short laugh. "There is only one answer." Aaliyah looked back at the missing condition, then at him. Her voice stayed calm. "Which answer would you like me to prove wrong?" Connor stopped the timer. Nobody laughed this time. 3 weeks earlier, Aaliyah Brooks sat in the same third-row desk beside the tall windows of room 214, finishing the last problem on a worksheet while most of the class was still halfway down the page. Morning light reflected off the whiteboard and made the black marker lines look slightly gray. Daniel Whitmore stood near his desk explaining a system of equations for the second time, his voice steady, practiced, and familiar enough that Aaliyah could follow it without looking up. She checked her answer once, circled it, then slid the worksheet beneath her textbook. From inside her backpack, she pulled out a worn spiral notebook with a bent blue cover. The first pages held ordinary school notes. The middle was different. Functions, inequalities, systems with parameters, problems copied from books at the county library. Aaliyah opened to a page she had been working on the night before and lowered her head over it. She did not have a private tutor. Her mother, Monica Brooks, worked long shifts in a hospital laboratory and usually came home smelling faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Money in their apartment went to rent, groceries, utilities, and whatever school needed next. Aaliyah learned the rest wherever she could. Library books, free practice sheets, old mathematics videos on a public computer when the home internet slowed down. She liked difficult problems because they did not care whether someone expected her to solve them. They did not smile differently when Connor Blake raised his hand. They did not ask who had helped her. They simply waited. A shadow crossed her desk. Aaliyah looked up. Whitmore was standing beside her. His eyes went first to the notebook, then to the completed worksheet beneath her textbook. "What is that?" he asked. "Just something I am working on." He picked up the edge of the notebook without taking it from her. "This is not today's assignment. I finished today's assignment." Whitmore glanced at the worksheet. Every problem had an answer. His expression did not change. That does not mean you need to jump ahead. Aaliyah looked at the page in front of her. I am not skipping the work. That is not what I said. His voice stayed calm, but two students nearby had started listening. There is a sequence for a reason. Focus on what you are being taught. Aaliyah closed the notebook. Okay. Whitmore nodded once and walked back toward the board. Connor, sitting across the aisle, glanced at the blue cover before turning forward again. Aaliyah slipped the notebook under her textbook instead of returning it to her backpack. That afternoon, she carried it home on the city bus and opened it at the kitchen table while Monica packed food for her evening shift. You hiding homework now? Monica asked. Not homework. Aaliyah showed her the page. Monica studied the symbols as if they belonged to another language. You understand that. Mostly. Mostly is dangerous. Aaliyah smiled. That is why I keep going. Monica touched the edge of the notebook. Then keep going. The next morning, Aaliyah brought it back to room 214. She still sat by the window. She still finished early. The only thing that changed was where she kept the notebook. From then on, whenever Whitmore walked past, she slid it quietly beneath the textbook and waited for his shadow to move. 2 days later, Daniel Whitmore stood at the whiteboard with a marker in one hand and a new problem written across 3 lines. The class had been asked to solve it using the method from the textbook, but Connor Blake raised his hand before Whitmore finished explaining the final step. Connor was 14, white, confident, and comfortable speaking before anyone else had finished thinking. Can I do it another way? He asked. Whitmore smiled. Show us. Connor walked to the board and used a substitution shortcut the class had not formally covered. His first line was awkward, but the idea was sound. Whitmore watched him finish, then nodded toward the answer. That is advanced thinking. Connor returned to his desk with a grin while 2 students whispered something approving behind him. Aaliyah kept her eyes on her notebook. She knew the method. She had practiced a cleaner version of it the previous weekend using a library workbook. She did not raise her hand. She had learned that knowing something and being invited to show it were not always the same experience. Later that morning, Whitmore handed out a short quiz. The final question involved 2 equations with variables on both sides. Aaliyah finished the first 4 problems quickly, then reached the last one. She could solve it using the class method, but the elimination approach she had practiced was faster. She paused with her pencil above the page. Then she used it anyway. When Whitmore collected the quizzes, he flipped through several before stopping at hers. His eyes moved over the final solution. Aaliyah. She looked up. Yes, sir. He held the paper slightly higher. Who showed you this method? The room seemed to become quieter around her. Nobody. Whitmore looked at the page again. You have not learned this in class. I know. Then where did it come from? I read about it. Where? A library book. Aaliyah could feel Sophie Reynolds looking at her from the desk beside the aisle. Whitmore set the quiz down on his desk. You need to be careful using methods you do not fully understand. Aaliyah looked at the correct answer at the bottom of the page. I checked it. That is not the point. His voice stayed professional, almost gentle. There is value in learning the process the way it is being taught. Aaliyah nodded. Okay. Whitmore moved on. No praise. No comment about advanced thinking. Just caution. At lunch, Sophie sat across from Aaliyah near the cafeteria windows with a carton of milk between them. You know he never asked Connor who helped him, she said. Aaliyah peeled the label from her water bottle slowly. Maybe Connor talks more. Sophie shook her head. That is not what I mean. Aaliyah looked toward the crowded tables. She had noticed it too. Connor tried something unfamiliar and it became confidence. She tried something unfamiliar and it became suspicion. Connor moved ahead and Whitmore called it potential. Aaliyah moved ahead and he told her to slow down. She did not want to turn every small difference into something larger. That felt exhausting. Still, patterns mattered. In mathematics, one unusual result could be coincidence. Repetition meant you checked again. Sophie lowered her voice. Does it bother you? Aaliyah thought about the notebook hidden under her textbook, the quiz on Whitmore's desk, and the question that always seemed to follow her best work. It would bother me less, she said, if it only happened once. The cream-colored envelope arrived on a Monday afternoon, tucked between a school newsletter and a reminder about Picture Day. Aaliyah Brooks almost left it in her locker because the return address belonged to the county school district, and most district mail meant testing schedules or forms her mother had already seen online. Then she noticed the words Advanced Mathematics Seminar printed beneath the logo. She carried the envelope to room 214 and opened it during the last few minutes before class. Inside was a single-page notice explaining that her standardized mathematics scores placed her above the benchmark for consideration in the district's accelerated program. Students accepted into the seminar would spend one afternoon each week at the high school across town working on advanced algebra, functions, and problem-solving beyond the regular middle school curriculum. Aaliyah read the first paragraph twice, then the second. At the bottom was one final requirement. Teacher recommendation. Sophie Reynolds leaned toward her desk. What is it? Aaliyah turned the paper slightly. Sophie's eyes widened. You qualified? For consideration. That means you qualified. Aaliyah looked toward Daniel Whitmore's desk. He was organizing worksheets into neat stacks, his reading glasses resting low on his nose. The room smelled faintly of dry erase marker and the citrus cleaner used on the desks after lunch. Aaliyah folded the letter carefully and slipped it inside her notebook. For the rest of class, the form seemed heavier than paper should feel. After the final bell, students disappeared into the hallway in a rush of backpacks and sneakers. Connor Blake left with two friends, still talking about basketball practice. Sophie waited near the door. Do you want me to stay? Aaliyah shook her head. It is just a signature. Sophie gave her a look that said they both knew it was not just a signature. When the room was nearly empty, Aaliyah walked to Whitmore's desk and placed the form beside his grade book. Mr. Whitmore? He looked up. Yes. The district sent this. He read the heading, then scanned the page quickly. Advanced Mathematics Seminar. Yes, sir. You need a recommendation. Yes. Aaliyah waited. Whitmore leaned back slightly in his chair. Your scores are strong. Her shoulders loosened for half a second. Then he continued. But scores are not everything. Aaliyah looked at the form. What else do they need? Readiness. Participation. Confidence. Maturity. She frowned. Am I not ready for the math? Whitmore folded his hands. That is not what I said. Then what are you saying? His expression tightened, though his voice stayed even. I am saying advanced placement is not only about getting correct answers. You need to be comfortable contributing in class, accepting guidance, working within instruction. Aaliyah thought about Connor walking to the board without being asked twice. She thought about the quiz where her correct method had become a warning. I contribute. Sometimes. Whitmore slid the form back toward her. You are doing very well where you are. Aaliyah did not touch it immediately. So you will not sign it. He paused. Not at this time. The room had gone completely quiet except for the ventilation above the windows. Aaliyah picked up the paper and folded it once, then again. Okay. Whitmore nodded as if the conversation had ended reasonably. Keep working. There will be other opportunities. Aaliyah placed the form deep inside her backpack beneath the spiral notebook she had already learned to hide. On the bus ride home, she did not open it again. She only kept one hand on the zipper and watched the school disappear behind the trees. 2 days after Daniel Whitmore refused to sign the recommendation form, Aaliyah Brooks sat in the third row of room 214 with her spiral notebook closed beneath the textbook and the folded district paper still buried at the bottom of her backpack. The morning lesson was about functions, and Whitmore had filled half the whiteboard with a problem involving a restricted input. His marker moved quickly, the black lines sharp against the bright surface. Once we simplify here, he said, the expression gives us one solution. Aaliyah looked at the board. Then again, something was wrong. Not with the algebra itself, with what had been left out before it. A restriction that should have been stated was missing, and without it, the conclusion did not hold the way Whitmore had written it. She lowered her eyes to her worksheet. Maybe he would catch it. He moved on. So we can eliminate the second possibility. Aaliyah's fingers stopped around her pencil. Sophie Reynolds, sitting one seat over, glanced at the board and then at Aaliyah. You see something, she whispered. Aaliyah did not answer. Whitmore had already told her she needed to accept guidance. He had already decided confidence was something she did not have enough of, except somehow it became a problem whenever she showed it. The safest thing would be to stay quiet. The equation did not care about safe. Whitmore began writing the next line. Sophie whispered again, softer this time. You do you not? Aaliyah took one breath and raised her hand. Whitmore kept writing for another second before turning. Yes, Aaliyah. I think that step needs a condition. The room did not change immediately. A few students kept copying. Connor Blake looked up from his paper. Whitmore glanced at the board. What condition? Aaliyah pointed with the end of her pencil. The restriction on the input. If you do not state it, you cannot eliminate the other case. Whitmore looked at the expression again. His face stayed neutral. That distinction is beyond what we are doing at this level. Aaliyah felt Sophie go still beside her. But the level does not change whether it is true. The words came out calmer than she felt. A chair squeaked near the back of the room. Connor stopped writing. Whitmore turned fully toward her. Excuse me. Aaliyah looked at the board, not at him. If the restriction matters, it matters even if we have not covered it yet. For a moment, the only sound was the fluorescent hum overhead. Whitmore capped the marker. There are conventions we use in introductory problems. Then should the convention be written? Aaliyah asked. His jaw tightened slightly. You are making this more complicated than it needs to be. Aaliyah thought about the unsigned form in her backpack. Doing well where you are. Stay with the material assigned to you. She looked back at the board. I am just asking if the answer depends on something that is not there. Whitmore stared at her for a second too long. Then he turned toward his desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a thin workbook with a yellow tab near the middle. Connor leaned back in his chair. Sophie's eyes moved from the workbook to Aaliyah. Whitmore flipped several pages and placed the book flat on his desk. All right, he said. His voice was controlled now, almost pleasant. If we are going to do this, let us see exactly how far ahead you think you are. Whitmore turned the workbook so only he could see the page, then copied the problem onto the whiteboard in 3 deliberate lines. It was harder than anything the class had worked on that semester, built around a function with a hidden restriction and a substitution step that belonged more comfortably in a high school course. When he finished, he set the marker on the tray and looked toward Aaliyah. Since you are concerned about missing conditions, he said, you can show us how this one works. Connor Blake gave a short laugh from the back row. Another student smiled without looking up from his desk. Whitmore's tone remained calm, almost casual, but the challenge had already changed the room. This was not a normal question. It was a performance. Aaliyah could feel it in the way students stopped writing and turned toward her. She looked at the board. The equation was familiar in structure, though not in exact form. She had seen something similar in a library book on functions 2 months earlier. What made her pause was not the difficulty. It was the same kind of omission she had just pointed out. The expression could be interpreted under more than one case unless a restriction was stated. Connor slipped his phone beneath the edge of his desk and tapped the timer. Sophie noticed. Seriously, she whispered. Connor grinned. Just curious. Whitmore held out the marker. Aaliyah? She stood. Her heartbeat was faster now, but her face stayed still. She walked to the board and took the marker from him. The plastic felt cool against her palm. She did not write immediately. She read every symbol from left to right, then returned to the beginning. Whitmore folded his arms. Do you need me to repeat the instructions? No, sir. Then go ahead. Aaliyah stepped closer to the board. She could hear the faint squeak of Connor's sneaker against the tile, the ventilation above the windows, the dry marker cap clicking softly as Whitmore rolled it between 2 fingers. She thought about the folded recommendation form inside her backpack. Confidence, readiness, participation. Every word Whitmore had used to explain why she should stay where she was. Now he had placed a problem above her grade level in front of the entire class and was waiting for hesitation to prove him right. Aaliyah drew a small vertical line beside the equation. Whitmore frowned. What is that? A separator. For what? The cases. Connor's timer passed 15 seconds. Whitmore looked at the board. There is only one case that matters here. Aaliyah turned toward him. Only if you assume the restriction. This problem is written the way it is intended to be solved. But the restriction is not written. The room went quiet again. Whitmore's expression tightened, though his voice stayed controlled. You asked for a more advanced problem. I gave you one. I did not ask for one. Aaliyah glanced at the equation. You gave me one because I corrected the first problem. Nobody moved. Connor looked down at his phone, then locked the screen. Whitmore took one step toward the board. Then solve it. Aaliyah nodded. I will. She placed the marker against the whiteboard and wrote the first substitution carefully. Whitmore watched without interrupting. One line, then another. The algebra simplified cleanly. Aaliyah paused, looked back at the original expression, and checked the domain before continuing. Whitmore's eyes shifted toward the workbook on his desk. Aaliyah saw it. She also saw the answer he expected forming on the board, but she could already tell that answer would not be the end. Before writing the next line, she looked over her shoulder. "Just so we are clear," she said, "which case did you intend us to assume?" Whitmore kept his eyes on the board for a moment before answering. "The standard case." Aaliyah waited. "Which means?" He looked at her now. "It means the one the problem is designed to test." Aaliyah nodded once. "Then I will solve that one first." She turned back to the whiteboard. The marker squeaked softly as she continued the substitution. One expression collapsed into another. She simplified the numerator, checked the denominator, then rewrote the function in a cleaner form. Connor Blake had stopped pretending not to watch. Sophie Reynolds leaned forward with both elbows on her desk. Daniel Whitmore stood near the teacher's table, arms folded, his posture still controlled but less relaxed than before. "Why did you substitute there?" he asked. Aaliyah did not turn around. "Because it removes the repeated expression. We have not covered that method." "I know. Then where did you learn it?" "The county library." A short silence followed. Aaliyah wrote the next line. The first solution appeared exactly where Whitmore expected it to. She circled it once. Connor glanced toward the workbook on Whitmore's desk, then back at the board. Whitmore stepped closer. "There. That is the answer." Aaliyah lowered the marker but did not return to her seat. "That is one answer. It is the answer given in the book, under the assumption you chose." Whitmore's voice hardened slightly. "You asked which case I intended. I told you." "Yes, sir." Aaliyah drew a horizontal line beneath the circled solution. "So I solved that case." Then she wrote a second heading below it. "Other valid case." Someone near the back whispered, "No way." Whitmore uncrossed his arms. "Aaliyah, you already solved the problem. Only the version with the restriction. The restriction is understood. Then it should survive being written down." Sophie's eyes widened. Connor looked at Whitmore, waiting for him to stop her. He did not. Aaliyah returned to the original equation and began again, this time treating the missing condition differently. The algebra took longer. She paused twice to check the domain. One line had to be rewritten after she caught a sign error. She erased it with the side of her hand, leaving a faint gray smear on the board, then started the step again. Whitmore noticed. So did everyone else. She was not performing magic. She was checking herself. That made the room quieter. "You are overcomplicating this," Whitmore said. Aaliyah shook her head slightly. "I am testing whether the second case still works." "It will not." She continued. The expression simplified. Another substitution. Another check. Then a second solution appeared. Nobody reacted yet. Aaliyah stared at it for several seconds before circling it. Whitmore reached for the teacher edition. "That is not in the answer key." Aaliyah looked at him. "I know." He opened the workbook to the marked page. "Then something is wrong." Aaliyah turned back to the board. "Maybe." She placed the marker against the original equation. "So let us check." She substituted the second solution back into the problem, one line at a time. The left side simplified, then the right. Same value. Connor's phone remained dark on his desk. Sophie stopped breathing for a second. Whitmore looked from the book to the board. Aaliyah capped the marker and set it on the tray. "It works," she said. Nobody smiled. For several seconds, Daniel Whitmore did not move. The teacher edition remained open in his hands, one thumb pressed against the page, as if the printed answer might change if he looked at it long enough. Aaliyah Brooks stood beside the whiteboard with the marker cap still between her fingers. Two circled solutions faced the class. One matched the book. The other matched the equation. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the hallway, a locker slammed and footsteps passed without anyone inside room 214 turning toward the door. Whitmore finally looked up. "The answer key gives one solution." Aaliyah glanced at the page he was holding. "I know. Then your second result is outside the intended scope. Because the book assumes the restriction." Whitmore closed the teacher edition halfway. "We are not debating the book." Aaliyah looked back at the board. "I am not debating the book." She pointed toward the original problem. "I am checking what you wrote." Connor Blake shifted in his chair. Sophie Reynolds stared at the two solutions, as if she was afraid someone might erase them before she understood what had happened. Whitmore stepped closer to the board. "In a higher-level class, certain conditions are sometimes understood." Aaliyah nodded. "Then if the condition is understood, the first answer is fine." "Exactly. But if the condition is not written, the second one still works." His expression tightened. You are treating a classroom exercise like a technicality. Aaliyah's voice stayed quiet. It changes the answer. Nobody laughed. Whitmore looked at the second verification again. Aaliyah had substituted the result back into the original equation. Both sides matched. There was no hidden trick left to dismiss. He reached for the marker. That is enough. Aaliyah handed it to him. Yes, sir. She stepped away from the board, but before returning to her desk, she looked once more at the two cases. Whitmore uncapped the marker, then stopped. Erasing the second solution would not make it incorrect. The thought seemed to irritate him more than the answer itself. You need to understand, he said, turning toward the class, that mathematics education depends on conventions. We cannot stop every lesson to explore every possible extension. Aaliyah reached her desk. I did not stop the lesson. Whitmore looked at her. You challenged the instruction. I asked about a missing condition, and then continued after I told you what was intended. Aaliyah placed both hands on the edge of her desk. The folded recommendation form was still at the bottom of her backpack. Confidence, maturity, participation. She could almost hear those words again, because the problem still had another answer. Whitmore set the marker down harder than necessary, though the sound was only a plastic click against the tray. The book gives one answer. Aaliyah looked at the whiteboard, then back at him. The book gives one answer because it assumes something the problem does not say. The room became completely still. Connor lowered his eyes. Sophie looked from Aaliyah to Whitmore. He stared at the board for another long second, then said, Sit down. Aaliyah did. Whitmore picked up the eraser and wiped away the second solution first. The gray residue remained faintly visible beneath the fluorescent light. Then he erased the first. By the time the board was clean, Sophie had already taken out her phone beneath the desk and captured a photograph of everything before it disappeared. The bell rang less than 4 minutes after Whitmore erased the board, but nobody moved with the usual rush. Chairs scraped slowly across the tile. Backpacks zipped. Connor Blake picked up his phone without looking at Aaliyah. Sophie Reynolds waited near the door while Aaliyah slid her worksheet into the worn spiral notebook and reached for her backpack. Daniel Whitmore stood behind his desk, arranging papers that were already straight. Aaliyah, he said, stay for a moment. Sophie stopped. Aaliyah looked at her and gave a small nod. I will catch up. The last student left, and the door clicked shut. Whitmore removed his glasses and placed them beside the teacher edition. Without the noise of the class, room 214 felt larger and colder. What happened today cannot become a habit, he said. Aaliyah tightened one backpack strap over her shoulder. Solving the problem? Challenging instruction in front of the class. I asked if the condition was missing, and I answered you. But the second answer still worked. Whitmore exhaled slowly. This is exactly what I meant when we discussed readiness. Advanced students need more than ability. They need judgment. The folded recommendation form seemed suddenly heavy inside her backpack. Aaliyah stared at him. Was Connor showing bad judgment when he used a method we had not learned? Whitmore's eyes narrowed slightly. Connor is not part of this conversation. You called his method advanced thinking. Because he was contributing to the lesson. I was contributing too. Whitmore picked up a yellow referral slip from the corner of his desk. You were disrupting it. Aaliyah watched his pen move across the paper. He did not write detention. He wrote instructional disruption and refusal to follow redirection. I want you to take this to Principal Collins before your next class. Aaliyah accepted the slip. The paper felt lighter than the recommendation form and somehow carried more weight. Did I say anything disrespectful? She asked. Whitmore paused. Respect is not only about the words you use. Aaliyah looked at him for one quiet second. Neither is fairness. She left before he answered. Sophie was waiting beside the drinking fountain 20 feet down the hallway. What happened? Aaliyah handed her the referral slip. Sophie read it twice. For what? Apparently, I disrupted instruction. By being right. Aaliyah glanced toward the classroom door. Maybe being right was not the part he disliked. They walked toward the administrative office together. The hallway smelled of cafeteria pizza and floor wax. Students passed in both directions, laughing, talking about lunch, carrying books against their chests. Everything around Aaliyah looked ordinary. The yellow slip in her hand did not. At the office entrance, Sophie stopped. I have the picture. Aaliyah turned. Sophie held up her phone. The photograph showed the board before Whitmore erased it. The original equation, the missing restriction, the first circled answer, the second circled answer, and the verification beneath it. "Do not delete that," Aaliyah said. "I was not planning to." Principal Margaret Collins sat behind a wide wooden desk when Aaliyah entered. She was a woman in her early 50s with silver beginning at her temples and reading glasses hanging from a cord around her neck. She read Whitmore's referral without speaking. "Tell me what happened." Aaliyah did not defend herself first. She explained the equation, the missing condition, the advanced workbook. The first answer. The second. Collins listened, then asked, "Do you have the problem?" Aaliyah looked toward the office doorway. Sophie was still standing outside. "My friend has a photograph." 5 minutes later, Collins held Sophie's phone in one hand and stared at the whiteboard captured on the screen. She did not say Aaliyah was right. She did not say Whitmore was wrong. Instead, she enlarged the image and read every line twice. Then she looked at Aaliyah. "I am going to send this to someone who teaches mathematics beyond this grade level." Aaliyah nodded. Collins looked again at the second solution. "Until I hear back, nobody is erasing anything else." Principal Margaret Collins did not call Daniel Whitmore into her office that afternoon. She did not ask Aaliyah to prove anything again. Instead, she saved Sophie Reynolds's photograph to the school system and sent it to Dr. Evelyn Parker, the district coordinator for advanced mathematics. Collins removed the students' names from the message and wrote only one question. "Please review the attached work and tell me whether the second solution is mathematically valid." Aaliyah returned to class with the yellow referral slip still folded in her pocket. The rest of the day moved around her in ordinary pieces. Science notes. Cafeteria noise. A bus ride beneath gray Virginia clouds. At home, Monica Brooks was already preparing for another hospital shift when Aaliyah placed the referral on the kitchen counter. Monica read it without speaking. Then Aaliyah showed her Sophie's photograph. "Were you disrespectful?" Monica asked. "I do not think so. That was not my question." Aaliyah looked down at the board captured on the phone. "No," Monica studied her daughter's face. "Then we wait for the facts." The next morning, room 214 felt different. Whitmore taught as if nothing had happened, but he did not call on Aaliyah once. Connor answered 2 questions. Sophie kept glancing toward the classroom door. Aaliyah worked quietly, her spiral notebook hidden beneath the textbook again. Near the end of second period, the classroom phone rang. Whitmore picked it up. His expression changed almost immediately. "Yes," he said. Then, after a pause, "I understand." He replaced the receiver carefully. "Aaliyah, Principal Collins needs to see you." The walk to the office felt longer than it had the day before. Collins was waiting with a printed email beside her keyboard. "Sit down," she said. Aaliyah took the chair across from the desk. Collins turned the page so they could both see it. Dr. Parker reviewed the problem without knowing who wrote the solutions. Aaliyah kept her hands folded in her lap. "What did she say?" Collins read slowly. "The first solution is valid under the conventional restriction. The second solution is also valid because the problem, as written, does not state that restriction." Aaliyah looked at the paper. The words were plain. No applause. No surprise. Just verification. Collins continued. "She also said the second solution required reasoning beyond the expected 8th grade level." Aaliyah felt something shift inside her, but it was not victory. It was relief. The kind that comes when a door finally opens just enough to prove it had been locked. Collins leaned back. "Then Dr. Parker asked me a question." Aaliyah looked up. Collins tapped the final line of the email. She asked who wrote the second solution. "What did you tell her?" "I told her an 8th grade student." Aaliyah waited. Collins's voice softened. Her next question was why that student was still in standard mathematics. For the first time, Aaliyah looked away. Her backpack rested beside the chair. Somewhere inside it was the folded recommendation form Whitmore had refused to sign. Collins noticed her expression. "Is there something I should know?" Aaliyah reached into the backpack and pulled out the cream-colored paper, worn now along the folds. She placed it on the desk. Collins read the district heading, then Whitmore's and signed recommendation section. "He said I was not ready," Aaliyah said. Collins looked at the mathematics email again, then at the form. The room went quiet. Finally, she opened Aaliyah's student record on the computer. "I think," Collins said, "we need to look at more than one problem." Principal Margaret Collins turned the computer monitor slightly away from Aaliyah and began scrolling through the academic record 1 year at a time. The office was quiet except for the soft clicking of the mouse and the muted hum of the air conditioner above the filing cabinets. Aaliyah sat with both hands around the straps of her backpack, watching Collins's expression change from concentration to something more serious. Your mathematics benchmark from last spring, Collins said, was well above the threshold for accelerated review. Aaliyah nodded. I remember taking it. Collins clicked again. And there is another one from the beginning of this school year. She paused. Also above the threshold. Aaliyah looked at the cream-colored recommendation form resting on the desk between them. So why did I not get moved? Collins did not answer immediately. She opened another section of the record. Because benchmark scores only trigger a review. Placement also includes teacher input. Her eyes moved across the screen. There are comments attached here. Aaliyah felt her fingers tighten slightly around the backpack straps. Collins read silently first. Then she looked at Aaliyah. One says strong ability, but may lack classroom confidence and readiness for accelerated placement. Aaliyah stared at the monitor, even though she could not see the words from where she Saturday who wrote it. Collins looked back at the record. Daniel Whitmore. The name settled into the room. Aaliyah did not react right away. It was not surprising enough to feel like a shock. It felt worse than that. It felt familiar. Collins opened the earlier review from 7th grade. Her eyebrows drew closer together. There is another note. Aaliyah waited. High test performance, but benefits from additional structure and may not yet demonstrate consistent independent readiness. Collins stopped reading. This one is also from Mr. Whitmore. Aaliyah looked down at her hands. Last year, Whitmore had taught a mathematics enrichment block that rotated through several grade levels. She remembered him now standing beside her desk while she worked ahead. She remembered the same careful tone. Slow down. Follow the method. Stay with the lesson. He had me last year too, she said. For enrichment. Collins nodded slowly. That explains why his name is here. She opened a third screen showing placement decisions. In both reviews, the recommendation section had been marked not advanced at this time. Your scores were strong enough to be considered twice, Collins said. Both times, the process stopped at the recommendation stage. Aaliyah looked at the folded paper on the desk. The form Whitmore had refused to sign 2 days earlier no longer looked like one disappointing decision. It looked like the newest version of something older. Did anyone else review it? She asked. Collins studied the record. Not beyond the initial committee notes. So one teacher could stop it. Teacher recommendation carries weight. Collins hesitated. Maybe too much weight if nobody checks what the recommendation is based on. Aaliyah thought about Connor being called advanced for using a method outside the lesson. She thought about being asked who had helped her when she did the same. Small moments. Small enough to explain away one at a time. Together, they no longer looked small. Collins printed the 2 previous reviews and placed them beside Dr. Parker's email. 3 pages. 2 years. The same name. I am going to ask the district to review your placement history, Collins said. Not because you solved one difficult problem. Because the record now raises a larger question. Aaliyah looked at the pages. What question? Collins met her eyes. Whether your ability was being measured or someone's expectation of you was. The meeting happened the following Tuesday afternoon in Principal Margaret Collins's office. After the last bell had emptied the hallways and the late August sunlight had turned the windows pale gold. Aaliyah Brooks sat beside her mother, Monica, with the worn spiral notebook resting on her lap. Across from them sat Daniel Whitmore, shoulders straighter than usual, his hands folded over a yellow legal pad he had not written on once. Dr. Evelyn Parker had driven over from the district office and placed 3 printed pages on the table between them. Aaliyah's mathematics benchmarks, the 2 earlier placement reviews, and the photograph of the whiteboard. Nobody raised a voice. That made every sentence feel heavier. Parker began with the facts. Aaliyah had exceeded the district benchmark twice. Her classroom performance was strong. Her second solution to the higher grade problem had been independently verified as mathematically valid. This meeting is not about one answer on one board, Parker said. It is about how we interpreted the student who gave it. Whitmore looked at Aaliyah. For the first time since the classroom challenge, he did not seem interested in defending the lesson. I believed I was evaluating readiness, he said. Monica's expression did not change. Based on what? Whitmore glanced at the placement comments. Participation. Judgment. How she responded to instruction. Aaliyah looked down at her notebook. Connor had been praised for moving beyond instruction. She had been warned. Connor's confidence had been proof of potential. Hers had been evidence that she needed more maturity. Parker turned one of the pages toward Whitmore. Can you identify an objective measure here that supports the conclusion that she was not ready? He read the page slowly. Not one that outweighs the scores. Then what did? Collins asked. Whitmore was silent long enough for the air conditioner to cycle off. The room became so quiet that Aaliyah could hear Monica's bracelet touch the edge of the chair when she shifted her hand. Whitmore finally looked at Aaliyah. I think I mistook your confidence for resistance. He swallowed. And when you worked beyond what I expected, I treated it as something that needed explanation instead of something worth examining. Aaliyah did not rescue him from the silence. He continued. I am sorry. Monica looked at her daughter before speaking. An apology matters when something changes after it. Parker nodded. She explained that Aaliyah would receive an independent advanced mathematics evaluation the next morning, without Whitmore participating in the decision. Collins added that the school would review recent placement cases where students met benchmark scores but were denied advancement primarily through subjective teacher recommendations. Aaliyah reached into her backpack and pulled out the cream-colored form Whitmore had refused to sign. The folds were soft now from being opened and closed. She placed it on the table. I can get another chance, she said. Whitmore looked at the form. Aaliyah kept her voice calm. What about the kid who believes you? Nobody answered immediately. She continued. If a teacher tells someone they are not ready enough times, some kids stop checking whether the teacher is right. Parker looked at Collins. Collins looked at the placement records. Whitmore stared at the blank legal pad beneath his hands. Aaliyah had spent weeks proving that numbers could be checked. Now the harder problem was sitting in the room with them. It had no answer key, only choices. 3 weeks later, Aaliyah Brooks stepped off a yellow school bus in front of Jefferson Ridge Middle School with the same backpack she had carried all year and the same worn spiral notebook tucked inside. Almost nothing about the morning looked different. The flag moved lightly above the entrance. Students crossed the sidewalk in groups. Someone laughed near the bike rack. The front doors opened and closed every few seconds. But Aaliyah was no longer waiting for someone to decide whether she belonged in harder mathematics. Her independent evaluation had confirmed what her scores had already suggested. Every Friday afternoon, she now traveled across town to the high school for the district advanced mathematics seminar. Dr. Evelyn Parker had also changed the placement review process. Teacher recommendations still mattered, but they no longer stood alone. Benchmark scores, student work, multiple teacher observations, and independent review would be considered together when a student qualified for advanced placement. Principal Margaret Collins had begun reviewing earlier cases where strong scores had been followed by subjective concerns about confidence, attitude, or readiness. Some students were invited back for evaluation. Aaliyah never learned all their names. She did not need to. Knowing someone else might receive a second look was enough. Room 214 had changed in smaller ways. Daniel Whitmore still wore the same pressed shirts and wrote carefully across the whiteboard. He still corrected mistakes. He still expected students to explain their reasoning. But when Connor Blake used an unfamiliar method one morning, Whitmore did not immediately praise him. He asked, "Show me how you got there." Later, Aaliyah solved a problem differently from the example in the textbook. Whitmore looked at her work, then asked the same question. "Show me how you got there." No suspicion, no warning, just the question. Aaliyah noticed the difference. She did not smile, but she noticed. That Friday at the high school seminar, sunlight stretched across long tables covered with graph paper and calculators. A student named Mason Harris sat beside Aaliyah staring at a problem involving two functions. He erased the same line 3 times before leaning back. "I do not know where to start." A few months earlier, those words might have made Aaliyah remember a classroom where uncertainty was treated like proof that someone did not belong. Instead, she opened her spiral notebook. The blue cover was more bent now. Pages near the middle had come loose from constant use. She turned to a clean sheet and drew the first part of the problem. Mason watched. "You already know the answer?" he asked. Aaliyah shook her head. "Not yet." She moved the notebook between them. "Start here." Mason picked up his pencil. They worked quietly, checking one line at a time. Back at Jefferson Ridge, late afternoon light settled over the empty desks in room 214. Whitmore stood alone at the whiteboard after the final bell, looking at a problem he had written for the next day. He paused before adding the condition beside the equation. Then he wrote it clearly. On the tray below, a black marker rested beside the eraser. Nothing dramatic marked the change. No applause. No announcement. Just one teacher reading more carefully, one school asking better questions, and one black girl no longer hiding the notebook that had once made adults doubt her. The problem had never underestimated her. People had, and for the first time, they were learning to check their work.